tonight, you'll get to choose which of 3 GiveWell recommended charities will get your £20. And remember, it's £20 because the donation is matched by a donation matcher. So it's quite a lot of money. So you have to make your decision wisely. Yeah. So I'm going to pass over to Ed. He's going to start.
Everyone, so tonight I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Against Malaria Foundation and tell you why I think this is where you should be giving your £20 to. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about malaria in general, and then I'm going to talk about what this charity does and why it's so effective. So for background, I think when you really want to find a really good cause, then it needs to be important, but also tractable, and the best causes are probably neglected by other people, otherwise all the low-hanging fruit has already been picked, so to speak. So malaria fulfills all these criteria really well. It's a terrible, terrible disease. There's 200 million cases worldwide last year, and 400,000 deaths. And 70% of those deaths were of children under 5. It's the leading single cause of death for children under 5 and for pregnant women. And the reason for this is because it's an insect-borne disease, and it affects the people who are very weak and who have no health care far more than everyone else. But not only is it like a terrible problem, it's also incredibly tractable. This is something that we can cure really easily. It's been completely eradicated from most of the rich world, and by preventative measures like getting rid of groundwater that mosquitoes can live in, putting nets over people's beds, or anti-malarial drugs, we can solve this problem incredibly cheaply. And it's also ridiculously neglected. It causes 3% of deaths and a much higher proportion of the deaths of young children. And it's less than 0.05% of global health spend, which is just amazing. But these numbers, they sound really impressive and big and terrible, but I don't think we have a very good intuition for just how bad this situation is. So imagine if 7 plane loads of children took off from Heathrow every day and the planes crashed. Like what the outcry would be, and how quickly it would be solved, even if it was far more expensive to solve than this. So this should be enough of a reason to be worried about malaria already, but lots of people are also incredibly worried about helping development and how people move out of poverty through economic needs. And as you can kind of see from this map, 90% of all malaria cases and deaths are in sub-Saharan Africa. So even completely aside from the public health problem, a lot of people believe that this is the greatest drag on the development of the very poorest nations, or one of the greatest drags. So there's a study in the Lancet, and I can give people citations afterwards if anyone's interested, that suggests this is £9 billion a year from Africa, from the economy of the poorest countries, not just in healthcare costs, but in lost productivity and lost tourism. And there are all these studies about how much more slowly this causes countries to grow. And another point I really want to highlight is we generally look at the best ways of saving lives as giving what we can, but an alternative development approach is by an organisation called the Copenhagen Consensus that has the world's leading development economists. They have 7 Nobel Prize winners on their committee, and on their latest one in 2012, they ranked malaria the second most important, most cost-effective investment for development out of like 40 different options, without considering the health effects at all. So this is a really important problem to talk about. So what does the Against Malaria Foundation, the charity I'm pitching to you specifically, do? Well, it's very simple. They fund the distribution of long-life insecticide-treated bed nets. So this is a very low-tech but very effective approach. I can maybe field a question about high-tech and other malaria treatments later if people are interested. But their key methodology is they have Rob Mather, the CEO, and a technology guy, and they get funds, they negotiate really good prices for nets, and then they communicate with local health ministries. So the countries will pitch to them and say, we really need a distribution in this area. And then they'll do their own research, work out where they can be absolutely sure of getting all their feedback requirements, their accountability requirements, their independent monitoring. And then they'll partner with local distributors, the charities that are already working in the area, and use their infrastructure to distribute the nets and do the pre-distribution surveys and the post-distribution follow-up. And they also run a simultaneous education program about malaria in general, but also about proper net use. So this is not only a very streamlined, but a very comprehensive and careful technique that they use. And why is this so effective? There's a nice picture of Rob Major there. Part of it is because he's an incredibly awesome, charismatic guy, and he's set up this wonderful organisation where he gets people to do a lot of stuff pro bono and for free. But, for example, that Apple you saw. But I think their biggest competitive advantage here is really detailed planning. So he has a policy that if a house needs 3 nets, it gets 3 nets. Whereas the typical thing is you distribute, say, 2 nets to every house, and then people kind of work it out. So this means you have to go to every house and work out exactly how many nets it has, which is a big cost. But they more than recoup this by using their nets more efficiently, using this process for education and for monitoring, and also with malaria, it's very important to completely getting rid of all of the malaria that stops it from coming back. So by covering everyone precisely, they have a much higher chance of completely wiping out malaria in a certain area. And he does a very emotional talks where he talks about going to villages where people say, like, after you've came, malaria just doesn't exist anymore. So then the partnership model is really important, so they don't have any of these costs on infrastructure, and also the fact they only focus on one very cost-effective process marks them out above a lot of charities that might do some of this, but some less effective things. And their other massive strength is they have absolutely sector-leading accountability and transparency. So much of their costs are on pre-distribution surveys, post-distribution surveys, so they have meticulous data on exactly how many nets are still being hung correctly and in what condition 1 year, 3 years, 5 years afterwards. So that's why they're such a good go-to charity of people like us who want to pick a charity, because we can say with real confidence that exactly where your money's going. And they put, and every net is linked precisely to a distribution. So I guess so some people in malaria nets don't sound like the most exciting, radical intervention, but this is a charity that does something simple and cost-effective for those that just don't have the most simple and cost-effective thing, and does it incredibly well. And that's why this is I think it's the only GiveWell recommended malaria charity, but it's currently their #1 most cost-effective charity. So I want to talk a little bit about exactly what you get for your £20 when you hopefully choose this charity this evening. So these statistics are from GiveWell, which Lucia's already mentioned briefly. And I want to highlight just how anal, for want of a better word, they are about costing in everything. So Rob Maynard was talking, he was much better speaker than me, and he would also give you much more cheaper numbers than these. But GiveWell, they not only cost in their cost per net, they also, for example, assign him a salary, even though he works for free, because donated time has to be costed in. Otherwise, charities that run donations have infinite cost effectiveness. And they cost in all of the resources that he uses from partners. So this is like an incredibly defensive and well worked out estimate. And I can talk in great detail about this if anyone has any questions. So the marginal cost per net distributed is £3.70, and the cost per child life saved is about £2,000. This excludes non-fatal cases and the extensive economic developments, which should by themselves be a reason to donate here. So I think that's just absolutely amazing. That's the reason why I'm involved in an organisation like Giving What We Can. But I want to kind of highlight to you just how good this is, because again, it's easy to throw numbers around. So let's compare this to the NHS. So who thinks that our society spending money on the NHS and having universal healthcare is a good investment for us? I do. And who thinks that we should radically slash the NHS's budget? Anyone? That's not Scrooge. Okay. So I've used statistics on how to save a life because I think it's more emotionally appealing. But if you want to do serious assessments of healthcare, you need to think in terms of disability-adjusted life years. So this is quite an interesting bit of nomenclature. A disability-adjusted life year is adjusted for like your level of illness, so you can compare things that extend people's life but keep them in ill health. So, for example, one DALY would be a year of healthy life, or say 2 years if you were in really bad pain, or 1 and a bit years in slight pain. So this allows you to compare health treatments. And believe it or not, this sounds slightly arbitrary, but this is a very well-defined quantitative measure that trillions of dollars are spent on the basis of. And there are big encyclopedias where they can apparently produce numbers for different diseases very accurately for these. And so this is how the NHS works. So the NHS will cover anything, any health intervention that saves a year of healthy life for less than £20,000. They consider that to be cost effective. And they'll go up to £30,000 for some and over £30,000 for specific cancer drugs. So £20,000 for a year of healthy life is pretty good. That's like cheaper than the cost of going to the cinema to get the length of the film Extra Healthy Life. But it's in comparison to the Against Malaria Foundation, then it's just like there's very little comparison because it's just £70. So it's literally 285 times better. There's only a good mental math for there. So you can barely even see this far. So I think if you take away no other statistic from today, then that's quite a good one. It's kind of a good ballpark upper bound for the cost effectiveness of health charities in the UK. Otherwise, it's likely that the NHS would be doing that job. And you can make literally hundreds of times more difference. You're not going to go on Amazon and see the same thing 300 times cheaper from different sellers. And I think that this decision is even more important when you're buying for yourself, because there are literally lives at stake. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
You touched on it a little bit when you talked about the sort of local ministries. I was wondering what you meant, or how the AMF works in relation to the government and the state that are already in place in the countries.
That's a good question. So I think it varies quite a lot on a case-by-case basis. The actual distribution partners are typically non-profits, I believe. There's got to be some interaction with the state in order to get into the country, and also to be sure that you can distribute them without them being stolen by corruption. So there are lots of distributions that they plan have fallen through because Rob Mayer, the guy who founded the charity, hasn't had the specific assurances that he needed from the state that he would be the person monitoring, or his people would monitor everything. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily they're doing everything, but it's very much keeping them on board in a partnership model.
How much capacity does AMF have?
Good question. So the AMF currently has $80 million worth of funds it can distribute, and I think it has capacity for up to $100 million. So they've got lots of capacity for more distributions. Earlier they did smaller distributions, and now they're moving on to bigger distributions. They've got one of the potential worries is they have a very good track record with small distributions, but they've only done a handful of big distributions so far. But they're confident that using the big distribution model, they can do lots of up to 100 million. So yeah, your £20 isn't going to fill it up, don't worry.
You mentioned they quite carefully monitor how effective the nets are after a certain amount of time. Do you have any feeling for how those statistics get? Are they still effective after?
I think I remember thinking they're surprisingly high. I think it's something like 80% in good condition and well hung after 3 years. But you can look this stuff up on their website or on GiveWell's website, which will know vastly more than I do.
How many countries does it work in that have malaria?
Pardon?
How many countries does it work in?
Sorry,
How many countries does it operate?
Oh, how many countries? Something like 8 or 10. There's some they've operated in the past, but they don't anymore. I think they're pretty much all in sub-Saharan Africa, but they're considering doing something in Southeast Asia.
Do you happen to know anything about the ratio of how many people with malaria sickens as opposed to the number it actually kills?
Yes, so it's 200 million versus 400,000. So yeah, so it's quite a low proportion. That's for 3 reasons. There are 5 strains of malaria, only one of which is very deadly. Also, it's really only hurts you when you have a very weak immune system, which is why it's so bad for pregnant mothers and children. And also there's the minority of people that just don't have the most basic care. Like, it really doesn't cost much to save these people's lives if they have the basic medical treatment.
So, most charities, like something like this, you give your donation in, and various cogs turn, and various different projects in different locations may or may not happen. For example, like the give and go thing that like you might have bought as a present to someone. I mean, it's not actually a go. Like it's some money that goes to the charity, and they have lots of different projects operating, and those projects may or may not provide goods or services that may or may not be something that recipients actually want. GiveDirectly is very different. Their model is basically they just transfer money from donors to very poor recipients. So they do unconditional cash transfers. They use modern mobile technology to make these transfers as efficient as possible. And this is a really, really well-studied intervention. Importantly, it's not just that it's been evaluated by charities evaluating their own programs. It's like rigorous, third-party, independent, randomized controlled trials. The absolute gold standard evidence. It's one of the widely reviewed, the thing that has the one of the best evidence bases in all kind of development interventions. And GiveDirectly itself is a very well-run, open, transparent, accountable charity, and they very carefully study all their interventions. So I think at the moment that every recipient is part of some study. They're doing comparisons between what's the best size of transfer, what's the best amount of information to provide the recipient, and what advice on what they should spend it on, or different ways of assessing who should receive the transfer. So they're gathering new information about how to improve all the time. So the model is basically they identify the very poorest of the poor by targeting firstly poor villages, and then within those villages the worst off individuals. Then they audit carefully to make sure that no one's bribed their way into the program or that there haven't been any mistakes. They transfer the money using mobile payment systems, so a problem with cash transfers in the past has been that, first problem with security and getting the money safely to people where you just don't have good infrastructure for banking, and also maybe recipients have to walk for a day to go and collect their transfer. GiveDirectly's the average recipient's round trip is just 30 minutes to collect their money, so they seem to have solved that problem. And they also extensively monitor and follow up with the recipients. They do an individual phone call with every single recipient to make sure there hasn't been any problems with people stealing the money or anything going wrong. So some statistics. The average recipient of GiveDirectly transfers lives on 65 cents a day. And so when people normally hear this sort of statistic about people in poverty living on $1 a day, you're but that doesn't compare, because what $1 or £1 can buy in England is completely different from what £1 can buy in Africa. But this is adjusted for that. This is what 65 cents would buy you. That's actually what they're living on, and it also includes the cost of any, or the value of any goods you produce yourself. So if you're subsistence farming, it's the value of the stuff you're consuming is 65 cents a day. And I mean, so the absolute poverty line is $1.95 a day. So these people are living on less than a third of that. And so one of the reasons it's so important and good to target the very worst off people, it comes back to what Ed was saying a little bit about neglectedness. So if something's neglected, that means there's not many resources already going in to try and solve the problem. And if you have something where you've got loads of resources pouring in, but you've got unsolved problems, and something there's no resources and unsolved problems, the problems that are left over when you've got lots of resources going in are because those problems are fundamentally hard to solve. In somewhere where there aren't a lot of resources going in to try and help, there's probably problems that are easy to solve. It's just no one's got round to it yet. So these are the most poor people who no one else is helping, and probably a lot of their problems that they're facing are really easy to improve, and the reasons why they haven't been solved is just, there's just no one's got around to it, not that they're like fundamentally difficult problems. So that's why it's important. And yeah, as you can see, the GiveDirectly transfers have a really massive impact. So I think these statistics for 3 years after the transfer, so you've got like a third, so these are basically like bulk grants, it's not an income transfer, and this is, so having been given those grants, they are able to make investments with them that yield them kind of like, about a third increase in income over the next few years, and big reduction in proportion of days children are going without food. Concern that people tend to raise with unconditional cash transfers is, won't people just waste the money, they'll spend it on gambling or alcohol or tobacco or something. I mean, all the evidence shows that that is just not the case. People spend these very sensibly. And it's important to remember that recipients of charity are humans, they are thoughtful, intelligent humans who want to do the best things for themselves and their family. And all the evidence suggests that people do spend these transfers very wisely. And GiveDirectly's overall efficiency rate is this over 85% of the money that is donated to them ends up directly in the hands of the poor. So, two things to mention here. Firstly, in most cases, looking at the overheads ratio, which most charity evaluators, people quote as a good measure of evaluating charity, it's not necessarily the most important metric, because even if you've got really small overheads, if you're working on a program that's not, if you're working on an intervention that's actually helping, it doesn't matter what your overheads are, if the actual thing you're doing is very useful. Also, when most charities quote their overheads and then program cost, what they're including in program cost, it's not how much reaches the recipients, it's how much are they spending on employing people to carry out the program, shipping the goods or whatever, transporting the goats. Whereas the statistic for GiveDirectly is actually 85% of the money that gets donated to them ends up in the hands of extremely poor individuals. So that's pretty impressive, really. So I have from GiveDirectly's website some personal quotes from both non-recipients and recipients. So this is someone who didn't receive the transfer. But she does say, they ask her, are you overall happy that GiveDirectly came to your village? And she said, I would say that I am happy with the coming of GiveDirectly to our village because they have changed people's lives. They have made unbelievable things happen. Who knew that almost everybody would own an iron-roofed house? So, it's nice because people might think there's problems with jealousy or people would fight, but actually many, or pretty much all of the interviews suggest that people are happy to see their neighbours being helped and see their neighbours getting this transfer. And from, this is a New Year's message. They GiveDirectly interviewed some people just in the beginning of the new year, asking if they had any messages they wanted to communicate to donors. And this is Esther, who said, I am very happy for the help GiveDirectly extended to me as a widow. God bless them. I built an iron-roofed house for our children and also completed one iron-roofed house my late husband left incomplete just before he passed on. I bought food, clothes, a mattress and bed sheets. I pray that the GiveDirectly community is ushered into the new year peacefully and continues to support, especially those villages that have not yet benefited. I don't think anyone is suggesting that cash transfers are the solution or even necessarily the best solution to poverty. There's reasons to expect that some more top-down interventions would actually could be more cost-effective. This is basically because some of the other top charities we recommend, like the Malaria net distribution or the ones that distribute deworming tablets, they're able to do things like negotiating prices with the companies making these things, buying in bulk, shipping in bulk, coordinating these distributions, that an individual recipient, living somewhere rural with little education and who's not informed about, firstly, they might not know that they need those things. They might and they just might not be able to access. There might be nowhere they can purchase a malaria net or a deworming tablet or whatever. So in some cases, you probably expect the very best interventions are these ones that can be top down, can be really efficient, and can distribute to people things that they couldn't access themselves. But what GiveDirectly is really useful as a benchmark. So because it's so straightforward and transparent, I mean, firstly, it gives recipients more dignity and more trust in them to do what they need most, rather than us deciding what we think they want and giving them something that may or may not be useful. But also it's like a benchmark to which all charities should be compared. So, when you're evaluating a charity, you can say, how good is this, how efficient it is. But GiveDirectly gives you the chance to say, okay, is this charity that good, or should we just give the recipients the money? I mean, it also gives you the chance to actually ask people that, would you like us to do this distribution, or shall we just give you the money? And I think that can be pretty powerful for the whole sector if it becomes the norm that basically, you have to prove your charity is better than just giving people the money before you start asking donors for donations. If that was the standard thing, that what donors were looking for was evidence that this was actually a better use of their money than just giving it to the recipients. And so I feel like I'm maybe being slightly pessimistic about the efficiency of other charities, or criticise them a bit, so I want to end on a more positive note, which is that we're really doing very well. In that, I mean, people say aid isn't effective, or there's all this money gone in, and Africa's still so underdeveloped. But actually, the actual statistics for absolute poverty, they're going down and down, and maybe within the next few decades there could be no extreme poverty anymore. So, what we're doing now is how can we solve this as fast as possible? How can we make sure that the fewest number of people have to endure this? It's not a kind of hopeless problem. It's it's how can we get rid of this as quickly as possible, not will we ever. Another random heartwarming thing. One of the transfer recipients, what they did was they started a band with the transfer. They started a business, which was a band, and they made a song, and it's just the loveliest thing. Any questions?
How did you directly decide how much money to give to people?
So they've tried out some different models of different amounts. What they mostly do now is a transfer of about $1,000 in total, with the first preliminary transfer of about $90, and then 2 separate transfers a few months later, which is partly constrained by how much the mobile banking system can transfer at any given time. They're doing some comparative studies to see which amount works best, but this is obviously if you give a larger amount, it's more kind of efficient because you're improving one person's life and you don't have to do the administrative costs of many of the people. Also, they think possibly having a large lump sum as opposed to a small amount over a long period of time allows people to make big investments that then have a high rate of return.
So then how do they decide whether to take everyone in the village out of extreme poverty or to because they think it might be fair to give one person a median price of income?
Yeah. So I guess if you give someone who's living on $1 a day £10, that means a lot more than giving someone who's living on £10 a day £10.
I get it, but it's still an issue of fairness.
So how do they target?
How do they make that?
So they, I think what they do is they bring the poorest people in the village up to like the same level as the rest of the village, basically.
Right.
So they're trying to not turn upside down the kind of wealth distribution of the village, but just bring the very poorest people up to the level of those who didn't get the transfer. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it's like, what's their philosophy on that? So, because I mean, like, I think giving money is such like a tangible thing. Like, we think it's fair to give like, everyone better, but we don't know whether it's fair to give everyone like a non-extreme poverty income, or to give everyone like a median quality income. I don't know. It's really difficult to say what's fair.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So within village fairness thing is. I think it's still important to think how much more it would benefit people who are living like on really small incomes to raise them a bit compared to like just one person. Just the returns on getting wealthier just decline. Basically, it's like logarithmic. Like each doubling of income brings about the same benefit. So like going from £10 a day to £20 a day is like, that's £10 extra, but that's the same benefit as going from like £1 to £2 a day. Basically, if you look at like happiness or reported life satisfaction, that's the sort of trend. So that's an argument for giving large numbers of people like smaller amounts of money, basically. Yeah.
Has there been any attempt to value the return on what is actually being bought? For example, the example given as iron roofs, they might be easier to maintain than thatch roofs, but if they don't actually result in any sort of health savings or whatever, you'd rather spend your money on malaria than a shining roof.
So the iron roofs, so it costs something like £400 to build like an iron roof house, and so both like it's much better to live in an iron roof house for your like health, comfort, and being able to save you store your food without getting you wet. But it also so it costs about something like £30 or £40 a year to replace the thatch roof, not including like time and labour.
Has there been any attempt generally to measure those across the remit of what people use the money for?
What you mean between like?
Is there any sort of data kept on what people spend it on and attempt to value the return on the collective investment used with this?
So I think the general statistics for the economic return is around like 20 to 30% over about 3 to 5 years, I think. Yeah.
Is there more long-term results as to what the rate of increase in incomes?
I don't know off the top of my head, and I think there are not very many studies longer than about 3 to 5 years. I think largely because people move around quite a lot. It's like really difficult to keep a large enough cohort over that time. Basically, a lot of even the ones where they did kind of 5-year timelines, they had a very high dropout rate. So I don't know the issue on.
So iodine. It might surprise many of you to know that around 2/3 of you have been drinking iodine all evening, and I'll explain why that's important in a moment. So iodine, it's a basic chemical element. It's the 53rd element. If you look down the periodic table, it's like a basic type of atom. It's what human beings call atoms with 53 electrons. And not only is it important in chemistry as a halogen, but it's also important. The laser pointer. It's also important biologically. So you eat it in lots of various different foods, and there are cranberries in the drinks this evening. The reason that you have to eat it is because it's an important nutrient for life. So, for instance, your thyroid gland is this butterfly-shaped organ around your trachea, which produces various hormones that are important. So, for instance, it's important in thermoregulation. If you're cold, your thyroid gland will produce one type of hormone, and if you're warm, it will produce another type to keep your body temperature very stable, because that's important for life. It's also particularly important for your cognitive development and your physical development when you're a child and a teenager. So having iodine is very important, so it's good that you've been having iodine all evening. And you would think that iodine, it's like a basic chemical element, it occurs naturally on the Earth's surface, everyone would surely be having plenty of iodine. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. For many people living in rural places in Africa, particularly people at high altitudes or far away from the ocean, they don't get enough iodine in their diet, and that can result in some very serious symptoms. So initially, if your thyroid gland doesn't get enough iodine, it's just not able to produce the chemicals that it needs to, because chemicals like thyroxine contain iodine. So it will tend to become under or overactive, which is called hypo or hyperthyroidism. But then as it gets more serious, you can get cretinism or goiter. So goiter is when your thyroid gland expands. As you can see here, your entire neck expands as a result of your thyroid gland expanding. And also cretinism is when your body, because when you were a child and a teenager, you weren't getting enough iodine for your thyroid gland to produce the chemicals involved in growth. Your systems don't develop properly, so you don't have enough muscle tone, you don't have the bone maturity. These people reach a height of often only 3 or 4 feet tall. They're unable to walk, they require daily care. Everything that they're doing, they're completely incapable of fending for themselves. And it gets worse. They get thickened skin, their tongues can become engorged, their abdomens can protrude. It's a really, really horrible thing that can happen to you as you get to the more severe stages. But what's also particularly important about iodine deficiencies is that even a very minor iodine deficiency does have a measurable impact on your IQ level when measured in standardized tests. So, as well as the very serious cases of iodine deficiency disorder, we're also worried about even the minor ones, where you get minor levels of brain damage that means that your brain hasn't developed properly as you were growing up, which even in and of itself is a very sad thing. And this is important because iodine deficiency disorders are actually really common globally. 2 billion people living in the world right now have some level of iodine deficiency disorder. So yes, a lot of those will be relatively minor, but even those will be experiencing a measurable decrease in IQ. And around 200 million of those have goiters, so have the horrible protruding necks. That's around 1 in 40 people. So you can see in this graph, it's giving you an idea. DALIs were mentioned earlier. It's a measure of how much damage is being done as a result of iodine deficiency disorders. So you can see the redder areas are where iodine deficiency disorders are very common. So in those areas, you can imagine if it affects 2 billion people worldwide, there are a lot of people in those areas that are affected by the disease. And as you can imagine, as iodine being just a basic chemical element, this basic nutrient that people need, it's really easy to solve this problem. You just put some iodine into salt, because salt goes in pretty much all food, and then you're done, because everyone is consuming salt anyway, and they're now going to get the levels of iodine that they actually need to live a healthy life. And this is incredibly cheap. It costs a few cents to add iodine to a ton of salt. That's 1,000 kilograms of salt can have iodine in it as a result of the salt iodization. So if you work that out in terms of how much it costs to improve people's lives, it's around a couple of cents per person per year. This is a really, really cheap intervention, and it's really well proven as well. So not only have there been loads of randomized control trials and all of the kind of really rigorous scientific research on this, but there have also been loads of case studies all around the world of countries like Switzerland that even up until recently had quite a high level of iodine deficiency disorder, but now they've managed to bring that down with these salt iodization programs. And when it was tried in America, for instance, they found that in the areas where it was particularly bad before, they were able to raise the average IQ by 15 points. So this is a real effect that it's having on people's neurological development. And it's also important to prevent in this way because it's very difficult to treat if you don't. If you leave it for a few years when the symptoms are relatively minor, when you have hypothyroidism and your hands and feet are cold, by the time you waited those few years, it's very difficult to do anything about. So if you get in early, you can really be much more effective. And what's also important about this is not only does it have an incredible impact on people's physical health, their mental health, but it's surprisingly also very important in terms of poverty relief. Something you might find surprising, but if people are wasting time because they're not healthy, because their IQ is lower, they're not able to spend as much time in school and benefiting from that, they're not able to be as much of a productive member of society, and as a result, productivity goes down. So it was estimated, for instance, by the Copenhagen Consensus that every $1 you donate to a salt iodization program returns $30 in productivity. So you're really leveraging your donations if you donate to this charity. which is the Iodine Global Network. The Iodine Global Network is a charity that does exactly what I've been saying, salt iodization. This incredibly simple, well-tested intervention. And what's also really good about them is that they are very clear about what they've done so far and what they're going to do in the future. So every year they publish this scorecard. So you can see every country in the world, how many people in that country have some level of iodine deficiency, etc. All the information you want. So you've got time series data. You can track their progress over time to see how they're doing. And as a result, I can tell you that they have had a huge amount of success. So to give you the context of this, 20 years ago, salt iodization programs were basically unheard of. They occurred virtually nowhere. People didn't really understand this as a problem, and the solution was certainly not known. But now I'm happy to say that 50 different countries in Africa have salt iodization programs, and 70% of people are covered by the salt iodization. So that's an incredible effect that you can imagine that this organization that has had by working with governments and also the World Health Organization. They've been able to have a massive impact by kind of leading people to establish these programs. And what's also really good is that they've not only done all this great stuff in the past, but they've got loads more that they could do in the future. Unfortunately, they had a $2.2 million funding gap last year. So that's just kind of basic extension of what they were already doing that they wanted to do, but couldn't because one of their major donors has pulled out, meaning a great opportunity for you who want to donate to something that really is in desperate need of money. And it's a sad fact that the Iodine Global Network doesn't get a lot of money because people don't even know what iodine is. They think it's this kind of weird, abstract, technical problem that can't be very important. They don't even know that they're eating iodine themselves. And so not enough donors are aware of the issues to actually value this as such a good intervention and donate to it. The various organizations within effective altruism have been very supportive of the Iodine Global Network. Life You Can Save, for instance, estimates that your £20 donation this evening will protect 3,000 people. Every one of you tonight can protect 3,000 people for a year from all of those horrible effects of iodine deficiency disorders. It's a really remarkable thing, and I hope that you choose to donate to them. So just to sum up then, I think the reason that the Iodine Global Network is such a good intervention is because the basic idea of a salt iodization program is really well established and well tested. So we're confident that basic idea is sound. Then you've got the Iodine Global Network, which in this very transparent way is carrying it out. So this is a really great opportunity to impact not only health and poverty, but also mental health. It's possibly the only organization within effective altruism which gives you the opportunity to impact mental health in a really positive way, which is something that's very difficult to do otherwise. So for those reasons, I hope that you donate to the Iodine Global Network, and I'll take any questions.
You mentioned that one of the donors pulled out. What was the reason behind that?
Sorry, I have no idea about that. It wasn't anything to do with the charity. It was the donor's decision that unfortunately they dropped out at very short notice. So not even the IGN really knows why they pulled out.
Don't you know if the charity also works in the UK because based on what I've read, can the overall rates of salt ionization in the UK are like less than 10% or something like that, but like most of the salt sold in UK supermarkets is not iodized, and there have been some preliminary studies showing that I think teenagers are on average like mildly deficient in the UK.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, so I mean normally somewhere in the UK which is close to the ocean, we can get access to fish. You'd expect that with the foods that we'd have enough in our diet. But yeah, it's totally possible that that would be important. I don't think they're currently working in the UK, but even that would be fairly effective. It shows you if we don't have enough iodine, then people living in rural villages where they've never heard of a salt iodization unit, they definitely aren't getting enough.
So as I understand, Iodine Global Network works with national governments and companies to try and promote iodization. How do they measure their impact given this? Because the government's probably not going to say, well, we've implemented this public health program just because this charity spoke to us.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why, go back to the previous one, GiveWell recommends them as a standout charity, but they're not comfortable listing them in their top 4 or whatever, because it's difficult to discern exactly how much impact they're having as opposed to another one. So I mean, if you made the assumption that the Iodine Global Network was solely responsible for all of the salt iodization programs that they've been in some way involved in, it would, massively beat AMF and all of the other charities in terms of effectiveness. But obviously that's an unrealistic assumption. As you say, India and the Sudan, for instance, they were involved there in just talking to local governments and getting them to enact legislation which would force people to iodize the salt and improve health in those countries. So if they had a significant marginal impact in those areas, then they have had a huge impact. But yeah, as you say, to know what the sort of counterfactual, if they hadn't gone to speak to the Indian government, would they have enacted laws at all? Would they have been as good? That's really difficult to say. So I think if you want to donate to them, that it's definitely slightly less certain than something like Against Malaria Foundation, where it's very clear where there's that one foundation that's sort of taking on all the responsibility for itself. You're going for a less certain but potentially even better charity if you donate to this one.
Are there any estimates of what percentage of the marginal 3,000 individuals that are iodine deficient?
What? Sorry?
So your £20 donation will approximately reach 3,000 individuals. Are there any estimation of what percentage of those individuals are iodine deficient?
Oh yeah. As I said, it's huge. It's like over 95%. Because it's 2 billion people worldwide that have some level of deficiency. But it's also difficult because a lot of the people that it's really important to get to are like pregnant mothers or young children, because as I said, it's all about your cognitive and physical development when you're growing up. So often they're solving a problem that doesn't really exist yet in the life that doesn't even exist in the mother's uterus. So yeah, it's difficult to measure it in that sense, but yeah, definitely. If you take into account any level of iodine deficiency, it's massive, like probably over 99%. If you look at levels of have they got goiter yet, then more of the order of 50%. Obviously, not all of them have horrible, disgusting disfigurements, but they have. If you palpate the area, you can notice that the thyroid gland has enlarged.
How severe does a disability have to be to count as a disability adjusted by field record, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is, do those numbers for disability adjusted life years that he mentioned, are those including the full spectrum of effects from iodine deficiency, or is that kind of talking about only the people who are having the most severe deficiency, only they count as having a disability?
Yeah, so these figures on here, depending on your philosophy, are potentially somewhat conservative. It depends how bad you think it is to live with minor brain damage to the point where your kind of IQ is reduced a little bit. That's something that's very difficult to... It's somewhat of a personal judgment, really, how you would choose to value that. And yeah, once again, depending on your estimates, you could potentially get a much higher number of some other estimate, Oskar adjusted life years, that could potentially be much higher than disability adjusted life years, depending on how you decided to weight them. But I think they do a reasonably good job of trying to take into account all the different levels. You can look into this. Health economists do huge amounts of research into this sort of thing, and go to an awful lot of trouble. But yeah, I think it's difficult to measure, but it'll give you some idea of how much damage is being done.
Two more questions.
I'm a little bit confused by that map because it doesn't really show any differences between Africa and, say, Europe or the United States. So does that mean that it's how severe problem is it in, say, Central Africa compared to the UK? Really, this map sort of seems to suggest that it's about the same kind of severity in both places. But is that misleading from what the map says? How bad is the situation in Africa?
Well, yeah. So this does come back to the fact that they've taken into account sort of any level of iodine deficiency. So people in America eating too much at McDonald's and not getting a sufficiently varied diet could potentially fall under the strand of having some level of iodine deficiency. But yeah, it is more about kind of specific geographic locations, like I said, like kind of high up on mountains potentially, where they don't have access to such a variety of food. So it's not specifically an African problem, at least anymore. 20 years ago, it was more of an African problem. But through the incredible work of the Iodine Global Network, it's not so such a ubiquitous problem in Africa anymore. It's more specific locations that are left.
How do they actually get the iodine in their diet for people that are not really?
Sorry? How do they actually get the iodine into the diet? I guess for the people who need it. Is it just the salt, or is there anything else?
Yeah. So the problem is that the sort of smaller manufacturers of salt that people in a rural village in Africa will have access to don't have the sort of technical skills to know the chemistry of how you get iodine into salt. So most of I think it's around 70% of the money that they spend is on people going to these smaller distributors of salt and training them in how to iodize the salt so that everyone who's being provided for by that manufacturer will have access to it. Yeah, and as I say, salt gets into pretty much all of your food, so that's a really good solution.
Okay, results are in! Speedy. Okay, so 21 of you voted for the Against Malaria Foundation, so that's £420 going to the Against Malaria Foundation, which is 105 malaria nets will be distributed. Yeah, why not? 4 of you voted for GiveDirectly, so that means £72 has gone to the people poorest in the world. So £72. And 12 people voted for Iodine Global Network, which means, according to Oskar's estimate, we have provided salt with iodine in for 36,000 people.
For a year.
For a year, yeah. So, pretty good.
So this has been pretty amazing and it feels pretty awesome. But personally, I think it's even more exciting to think about what more we could do with donations. And I think it's quite cool to think that if every current Cambridge student donated 10% of their income to effective charities like these, in the first year of our earning, we could fund enough of these effective interventions to save over 23,000 lives. So yeah, I think it's a thing, doing what we can to is a thing worth thinking about doing.
How many villages is that?
How many villages? I don't know how big is a village. But that's a lot of lives that we could save. So.
They don't even have commas.
Yeah, I think I kind of killed the program a bit by putting in things. But yeah, so if you can hand him the feedback forms, and then there's more cocktails at the back, and we'll put on some music. Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks so much.
Okay.